me show you how to be a good breezy and change your predictions after.
Hello, my dear Bayesians! Big news, I am considering running a 6-week, more or less, live cohort of my advanced Bayesian regression course from Intuitive Bayes that I wrote with the brilliant Ravin Kumar and Tommy Caparetto. Think weekly live sessions, projects, office hours, community. So if you are into practical Bayes and want to see how it's done in the wild, in practice, and want to learn that, well, if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to answer the short Google form in the show notes to help me scope demand and logistics, and of course also to get the early bird access and discount. Thank you so much for your help and for being such a good Bayesian.
It's the same for me. Like each time I deploy a model or, I'm done with a paper or something like that, it's as if I'm like, I'm underestimating it in the sense that I already know all its flaws, and so I put it out there and then, maybe people like it and they're like, oh yeah, that's great. And then, I'm like, yeah, but I think it'd be better with this or with that. And, it's just like the work is like that also as a modeler, where you have also to get good at, sure, always seeing, what's next, but also being able to celebrate the momentary wins. Definitely a challenge. But yeah, I completely understand what you're saying, where you're like, okay, this is published. Now, how can we make it better? And I also, that resonates a lot with the experience I had trying and doing that in soccer. And that's also why I used a lot your paper to come up with ours, because like football, American football and soccer are much closer than baseball and soccer are, because they are much more continuous and depend a lot more on the other players. And we ended up having to do the same thing, at least for the first version, where we were like, okay, let's just focus on one position. For us, it was the striker, and then you incorporate the rest of the positions. But it's like if I had to do it for if I had to do it for a professional club, I would definitely need to come up with different wars for each position, and then trying to find a way to combine all that for the whole team. But definitely you need a different way to estimate what a player brings to the team in soccer and football, because they are very specialized and also much more continuous and dependent on the rest of the team.
Yeah, and soccer, the one of the biggest challenges too is the actual events that you have are far fewer in terms of what we think of as traditional events, like whether it's, goals are extremely, small count. Yeah. But then, even just shot attempts is not that many. Like at least in NFL, we have every play, it has a start and an end point. And so we just accumulate a lot of events. The scoring is still relatively low, but there's still constant plays and outcomes that are observed in different ways. It's the complexity though of how the players are interacting with each other that just makes it so much more difficult than things like baseball, right? Baseball's got this there's a batter, there's a pitcher, then there's a ball into play, and then the defense will do things, but and there's a base running, and that's complex, right? Handling base running is extremely difficult. There's no denying about that, I think, but the basics of batter-pitcher matchup is so much simpler than everything that can happen in a football play. And this conversation just reminded me actually of when I was a PhD student, after I got this paper out. Funny enough, there was a STAN workshop that was led by Michael Betancourt that a number of PhD students, we got to go for free. And I had talked to him about this problem. And he said, oh, you should just do it from the ground up from personnel packages. And the thought has always stayed with me of like, oh, you should model from the personnel packages. And then, if a player changes teams, then you could generate, if a player, this is their this is their effect, their contribution when they're personnel package with 2 tight ends versus 1 tight ends. And each team has a different mixture of how they use these different personnel packages. So for people that don't know what that means just different counts of different types of positions on the field that they can have, whether that's on offense or defense. And teams vary in their style. And so one could imagine if I have like, hey, a wide receiver's effect for each of these different potential personnel packages. If I see how that player goes from one team to the next, I can see hypothetically what would I estimate to be their contribution, right, during the trade. Like, oh, well, if you're running this style of offense, their value would only estimate to be blank. But if you're running this style of offense, the value would actually be lower or higher, depending on that shift in that personnel package distribution. And that's another thing where that's a layer of how the players could be arranged that could matter in this estimation. I've never done it. That information is public, though, in those samples I talked about, and it could be one way to improve upon that problem. At some point, one of these days, I'm going to get back to it, or I'm going to make a suit.
Yeah, but that makes sense. I mean, if you think from a very causal perspective, that's definitely also the way I would do it in soccer also, because you try to find the most, elemental building blocks, and then once you have that, then for sure, you can add it to a different team and see how the characteristics of that team interact with the player's characteristic. But your idea is mostly try and find the root nodes of the causal graph and then modeling the rest with that. And war is just an emerging phenomenon of the player's characteristics. But this is not the lever you're going to pull to actually make a causal experiment on the player's abilities, right? War is determined by other characteristics that comes before it in the deck. And if you can model that, that is much, much more powerful than just looking at war.
Yeah. And war itself, just as like this idea, there's this whole thing of wins above replacement. Replacement is I can't stand that word personally. I have struggled with what that's supposed to mean. And that's across all sports. Instead of us doing it relative to what we're inferring to be average, which it's probably not even the average player because of the whole selection bias we observe in sports of who's getting in and if they're actually getting to play, they're probably decent enough, right? Versus where do we actually observe the selection of this distribution that's being observed, right? It's a hard problem, and that varies by the sport too. And this replacement level idea, I remember in that paper, we did just some roster cutoff rule of, each team has X number of players, multiply a number of teams, there's a backup, and bam, there we go. That's if you're after this, your replacement. That definition I've always viewed as like, I don't know. And football's very different salary structure and contracts versus like baseball, where baseball literally has, I would say, replacement players that can get just signed and put on a team, called up from the minors. Football doesn't have that. Football, like there's practice squad, like players on the practice squad that aren't actually in the league and they could get elevated from the practice squad. And so maybe one could say their replacement level in a sense, but it's just it doesn't happen that much. Like it's like that idea. I don't even know if it generalizes well across sports. Like we try it across sports, but that's something I've always struggled with. It's a personal thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really depends on the sport for sure. And on the teams. Like even in soccer, a replacement level at PSG would not be the same as a replacement level at the last team in the French league. So yeah, it's like I find in soccer it's a bit easier to define than football because like you have usually a starting 11. And so basically if you're not regularly in the starting 11 for the big games, you qualify as the replacement level for that team. So it's like ready. It's like your first choice out of the bench, basically.
Well, and that's in American football. It's these constant different personnel packages that it's like, oh, you're one of the 4 wide receivers that are used in the 4 wide receiver set. So it's not like you're not consistently starting. It's just, you're a specialist for this particular role or what. Like it's
right. Oh yeah.
That's why American football's got this whole different dynamic to it that complicates it, because all the substitutions that take place on that level of these skill positions, it's very it's hard to figure out what's the right way to define that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, but you seem to really like football because you work a lot on that. So you have actually another like paper of yours I want to touch on is your work on the going deep framework. So yeah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this paper was the result of when the Big Data Bowl that I mentioned was first launched. In the first year before it even partnered with Kaggle, the NFL just released this big data set, first 6 weeks of either the 2017 or 2018 season on GitHub. And it was full raw tracking data. So you get all this information, every player, every 10th of a second. And the NFL also had some event annotations of like when the snap was, when the pass was thrown or the ball arrived. And so it was extremely rich. And what we decided at CMU, a group of us, myself and a number of other PhD students at the time, along with Sam Ventura and a collaborator at Pitt, Kostas Pellikrinis, we were thinking of this idea of how can we extend what I had previously done in that paper of with Sam and then my colleague Max Horowitz on modeling expected points at the play level. How can we take that idea and extend it within the play, being inspired by previous work by Dan Gervone and Luke Bourne on this continuous time EPV that they did in basketball? And how do we do that in football? And like part of this first Big Data Bowl, you could enter the competition, or there was also a special issue with a journal Quantitative Analysis in Sports. And we decided to go for that path because we probably spent like 3 or 4 months coming up with this flow diagram, this flow chart that's in the paper of how do we model football, right? It's like a play could either be a drop back where the QB keeps the ball, and if the QB keeps the ball, the QB either will be potentially a designed run or scrambling if gets pressure on them, or eventually the QB gets sacked, or if the QB is going to throw the ball, who's the QB throw the ball to? Given that he throws the ball to somebody, you need to model the completion probability. Given there's all these different models that go together, and then eventually it leads to, if someone is the ball carrier, where are they going to end up on the field, right? And one of the things, though, about this, in this paper, we did this whole process and we just focused on actually building the model to estimate the ending yard line. And I was really naive in how I did this originally, where it's like, oh, we did this like very ML model selection problem where we had like an LSTM versus a lasso versus a this, and you can see, okay, which gives us better expectations of ending yard lines. And then I was stupid and took that ending yard line and fed it through the models that I had for expected points and win probability at the play level. And those models were very simple. It was at the start of a play, what we would do is we had this multinomial logistic regression model that, given initial play context, we'd estimate the probabilities of different scoring events. What would be the next scoring event? And then given those, we would just sum across those associated probabilities with the point values of the different events, and then you would get your expected points at the start of a play. Now, the way one should think about this is this is just some utility function. Ignore the fact it's called expected points. It's just some insert utility function. And what I really cared about was the expected value of this utility function. Now, the problem is I built a model that spit out a single point estimate, and I then just said, oh, I'll throw this point estimate into this utility function and say that the expected value of the utility function. The I'm dealing with a very complex utility function. It's asymmetric. It's broken in various ways. Throwing in this point estimate does not give me the expected value of the utility function. And a reviewer that we had for the paper laid this all out for us in like a simple dice example. And I never felt so stupid in my life, but then it led me to this path of, what the hell am I doing? I should just be modeling the distribution. Like, why are we modeling just point estimates? And there's a number of ways you could do it. Like we could have just gone a Bayesian route, but we had one of our co-authors, Taylor Pospisil, as part of his dissertation work. He developed some high dimensional conditional density estimate techniques, and that led us to then using his random forest for conditional density estimate approach, where now what we did was we had this conditional density estimate for the running back's ending yard line as a function of this tracking data. And now with that full distribution estimate, we integrate over this utility function that we had from this 2019 paper. And then we actually got this nice looking continuous time EPV curve. And it was a lesson for me too of in the modeling of football data and thinking of how many yards a ball carrier is going to get, modeling the expectation is a bad idea. Just thinking only about the expected value is a bad idea, because if you think about a football field, it's 100 yards and a ball carrier has the ball. The distribution of what they could get, it's going to be really this mixture between, do they go all the way for a touchdown versus some bounded skewed distribution with this tail going towards the target end zone and a big mass near where they're at, probably with defenders around them, right? And so when you model the expectation, you're going to get this line in a low density region. You're actually going to get a value that's not likely to happen. But it's the mean of this distribution. And I still see people consistently do this problem all the time in this, and like, you know, the NGS has like a leaderboard of expected rushing yards, and that's a flawed idea in this concept. The distribution of what you can see for the yards that you gain, it's not normal, right? The mean is not a likely value. It's going to fall somewhere in a low density space, and that's even just more reinforced the importance of, we need to constantly remind, you know, students and who we're working with to think about, you know, full uncertainty propagation of what they're trying to do, right? Think about what's the distribution of the outcome. What can that look like? And are you estimating the right thing?
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And actually, how do you do that? You know, since you're like, speaking of the classrooms, because you teach a lot. Also, you teach in undergraduate, you teach in master level, and you teach sports analytics, NLP, Bayesian stats. So yeah, I'm curious, how do you communicate these concepts to the students? And also, just curious if there is like, what's the hardest concept for students to internalize?
Yeah, so for context, my sports analytics class that I've now taught for the past 2 years, and I'm going to be teaching again in the spring. I'm turning it into a book, which is exciting. The Statistical Methods in Sports Analytics, to be delivered on April 1st, 2027, which I find hilarious. That's April 1st. April Fools, I wrote a textbook. But it's going to be, what that course really is I have advanced undergrads, juniors, seniors at CMU, as well as master's level students who have taken our core regression course. Then my sports analytics class is really, I've had students tell me this of like, you know, you attracted us to sports, but we really just learned applied Bayesian modeling from you. I didn't realize that, but this carries over in all these other different contexts. I was like, yeah, that's the point, right? Of motivating, of thinking about different problems in sports to lead them to, hey, you know, how do we incorporate prior knowledge and the benefits of polling, and, you know, the advantages that we could get from full uncertainty propagation, and how when we want to, in sports, we often want to simulate things. You have a posterior distribution. There you go. There's your simulations. Pump it through whatever you want. You already have the ability to simulate and see what can happen with full uncertainty throughout it, right? It's a wonderful concept, and illustrating to them it has been really fun. The challenge, though, and this was something discussion with Samir Deshpande, who's been on this show before. Because when I was developing this course, I had some conversations with him about actually teaching Bayesian modeling and what advice he had. And his big point to me was getting students to understand how to write out a model and just build models on their own. And what I've realized from doing this is students struggle to literally write down the model, right? They're so familiar with assignments, exams of you're going to fit this model of this assumption and model with this distribution and do these steps. Like we tell them what the model is, right? And so what I decided to do as a homework assignment in the class, and it's by far the lowest grade that they get in the class, this homework grade, it just absolutely murders them right across the board, is I give them context, and I give them a description of the data set, the context of the data, and then I give them problems that I'm interested in, of like, okay, here's a tennis level data set, and here's the description data dictionary, and you want to infer different server abilities that you have, different returner abilities that are there. And you think that, okay, there might be like an additive shift based on the server level, and you want to account for these different things, but also you have these server characteristics. Write out for me the model that you're going to use, and what are the assumptions? What are the different levels of the model? What's level 1? What's like the basic observational level unit? What's level 2, the higher level unit at like the player server level? What are the characteristics that are there, right? And making them actually write out the model and the data generating process, they struggle with. And it's so funny because it's, I do it in the lectures, and I remind them of this, that as I write out these examples, all right, this is our response. We're assuming it follows this distribution. Now, these parameters that we have, we're going to model in this way. And these parameters, we're going to say, follow this particular distribution. Like I write out level 1, level 2, level 3 of these models. Tell them you got to get familiar with this. And you'll see there are students, they get it. And they ace this homework assignment. And then there are other students that are like, I never have to write out the model. This is just given to me. Like, no, you don't understand. After you leave school, you're going to get a data set, right? You're going to get data. You're going to be working on problems with colleagues and stakeholders, and they're not going to tell you how to write out the model. You need to figure out what is an appropriate model for me to write out, what for me to try out and assume and test and evaluate, right? That step, that's the hardest step for them, I honestly think. Because like teaching them how to code things now and everything there's so many different resources, and then you can honestly use something like Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT to say, yeah, here's my model, give me the stand code, and it can spit it out reasonably well now, to be frank with you, right? But you still need to know how to write the model, right? It's not going to give you the right code if you don't know what model you want to construct, and that's by far that's the hardest thing to get across to them, and and it's the most important though.
Yeah, no, for sure.